I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I'm really super excited to have Marley Loomis here with us from Alaska. But before I introduce her, I just want to talk a little bit about the art in the room and the program as a whole. The program is all based off of the book Remarkably Bright Creatures, which I'm assuming most of the people in this room has had the opportunity to read it. If you read it and you have it and you're done with it, we'd love you to return it because there are people who are looking for it and want to read it. But if you love it and you want to keep it, that's fine. Or if you want to give it to a friend, that's also fine. We just are trying to get as many people as possible to read that little book. It's not that little, that book that we just loved. Yeah. That novel is by Shelby Van Pelt, and if you didn't get to hear her speak when we had her speaking, it was recorded and you can watch it on our website. Tonight is also being recorded, so people who say to you, oh shoot, I meant to do that last night, let them know that in just a few days it'll be up on our website. I want to talk a little bit about the art in the room, which all was brought to us by community members related to the book. We do have a voting system, so if you haven't yet voted and you have a piece that you can say, this one's my favorite, there's a little ballot box on top of the piano back there. We'd love you to vote. The prize for the most votes is merely bragging rights and a ribbon. But it's kind of a cool thing to win this show. This is, we're really pleased with this show. I want to thank my committee. I don't do this alone. I just happen to be the face of the library, but I work with a lot of people behind the scenes, and they're all in the room right now. Raise your hand if you're on my committee. There they are. Thank you. Without them, we wouldn't have Marley here tonight. We wouldn't have had Shelby Van Pelt. And next week we'll be showing the film, My Octopus Teacher. If you haven't seen it yet, come join us. If you have seen it, come join us anyway. We're going to serve popcorn. I forgot to tell the committee that. We're serving popcorn. But you didn't come to see me be a clown in front. So let me introduce Marley Loomis. Marley Loomis is currently a master's student at Alaska Pacific University in Anchorage, Alaska. Studying octopus behavior, not the giant Pacific octopus, which is what we'll be learning about tonight, and the character in our book, Marcellus, but she is an octopus specialist. Marley will be sharing her love and knowledge of the giant Pacific octopus, both in the wild and in captivity. And over the last 5 years, she's been the primary caretaker of multiple giant Pacific octopuses and a variety of other octopus species. You can expect some interesting facts and lots of fun pictures. Thank you, Marley. You're on.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for the introduction. Just so everybody knows, since I am remotely here, if you have any questions, please feel free to wave or jump around or get Ruth's attention, and I will be happy to answer your questions along the way, but I'll also have some time at the end for questions as well. So as you already heard, my name is Marley Loomis. I am currently getting my master's in environmental science in Anchorage, Alaska. My research specifically is working with one behavior of one species of octopus, so it's relatively fine scale. But I adore working with all species of octopuses. Today, I will be speaking with you about largely the giant Pacific octopus, but I wanted to throw a few other species in at the end that get a little bit left out of the media. So expect some other species to show up at the end as well. Before I moved up to Alaska, just so you all know a little bit more about my background, I worked at the Port Townsend Marine Science Center for about 3 years. First as an AmeriCorps member, and then later as an employee there, and absolutely loved it. If you ever get the chance, go visit. But that's where a lot of these photos are taken from. So just so you have a little context, most of these animals are not actually up here with me in Alaska. They were down with you in Washington. All right, so for the structure of this presentation, I'm basically going to walk you through the different life stages of what you would see in a giant Pacific octopus. So I will start out just by giving you some good old background information, and then from there I'll walk through early life, middle life, and later life. And then at the very end, like I said, I'll throw in some other species just to mix things up a little bit for you all. Alrighty. Oh, there we go. So to start, the giant Pacific octopus, who you all are familiar with, I assume, Enteroctopus defleeni is our scientific name here. This species is short-lived in terms of the larger animal kingdom, but in terms of octopuses, they actually have a relatively long life. So we see 3 to 5 years compared to other species, which may not even live a full year. So our GPOs can live a little bit longer. Their conservation status is currently least concern, which just means that we know there are a lot of them out there in the wild, and there aren't any huge perceived threats right now on their population, which is fabulous. We love to see that. They have a really interesting life history, which is one of the reasons why I structured this talk the way I did. They have a really long juvenile period and a very short adulthood. So essentially that means they are growing rapidly, up to 2% of their body weight a day, for the large majority of their life until they become adult or reach reproductive maturity. And then that's the end of their life cycle. Basically, they'll grow through their whole life, they'll lay eggs, reproduce, and then die. So it's a really dramatic life cycle that we see. They are brooders, which means they will lay eggs, the females lay eggs, and then sit with their eggs, maintaining them, keeping them clean, safe from harm. They don't give birth to live young. They don't lay their eggs and leave. They'll sit and monitor them. They have a likely large individual range. So what this means is that one octopus, although it may live a relatively solitary life, it will probably wander about a bit. So other solitary animals that we see, or territorial animals, will set up their territory, they'll stick with it, that's where they live their whole life. And what we see with the giant Pacific octopuses is that they will live their solitary life, but they're not going to stay in one den for their entire life. They'll hang out in a den for a while, move about to another den, go exploring to another den, and then when it's time to reproduce, that's when they finally stick to one spot. These animals feed on a lot of other animals, depending on what is around them. Crustaceans, other mollusks, and fish are the most common here. Was that a question? No, okay. Yes, large variety in their diet, and they also are an important diet item for other animals. So octopuses are one big squishy mussel, which is what a lot of other predators like to eat. So they do provide an important prey source for marine mammals, fish, sometimes birds, wide variety of animals there. So to start with the early life of this octopus, this video here is of the main character of our story. This octopus is named Sylvia, and I'll show you another photo of him in just a minute here. But we came by this tiny octopus via a zooplankton light trap. So the Port Townsend Marine Science Center was working with Department of Fish and Wildlife and some native groups to monitor the fluctuations of Dungeness crab larvae. So to do this, it's basically a giant 5-gallon water bottle with some funnels and a light in the center that we lowered into the water. And plankton is attracted to that light and swims in, gets caught, then we can count all of the plankton and release it back out. So plankton, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that term, just means that the animal is unable to swim against a current. So a jellyfish is also a type of plankton, along with young octopuses, young fish, small crabs, things like that are all considered plankton at that life stage. So inside this giant 5-gallon water bottle, we're counting all of these crab larvae, and we see this very young little octopus. And we actually found a large number of octopuses coming through our trap, which all got released. But the interesting thing about Sylvia is that Sylvia was finally ready to settle down onto the bottom. So octopuses have this, or most octopuses have this life stage where they are planktonic. So they'll float through the water, but eventually they settle onto the bottom to wander around like the octopuses that you and I are familiar with. This makes them meroplankton, which just means they spend part of their life as plankton. So because of this meroplankton stage, we have a hard time raising octopuses. When an animal is in a planktonic stage, the aquarium requirements are really unique. If you've been to an aquarium and you've seen like a jellyfish tank with a big round lit up tank that has constant water circulation, that's the type of tank that is required for raising or housing any animal that is planktonic. And the Port Townsend Marine Science Center is a fabulous place, but does not have a giant jellyfish tank to put a tiny octopus into. So for us, it was required that we only keep animals, only keep an octopus if it is already in that benthic or bottom dwelling stage. In doing this and keeping an octopus, if we were to find one at the right stage, we are actually lessening impact on wild populations because we're not pulling an adult that is closer to reproductive maturity out of the breeding pool. Instead, we're just raising a very small individual and hopefully facilitating their growth into reproductive maturity. So this was a very unique situation that we were in to allow us to catch this octopus. Just for those of you who are interested in what these funny pictures are here, this top left square is actually an invertebrate that typically lives in really deep water that has, I think, 18 retinas. So pretty cool deep water organisms would show up in this trap. And then we would also see some really cool little crab larvae. That's the bottom left. That's 2 different types of crabs right there. And those actually showed up very frequently in a large number of different species. So that's very cool. Alrighty. So here's a better view of Sylvia on the left. Here you see 3 little individuals. The one that's scooting by, swimming by is, we called that one tiniest. We called the biggest one tiny, the middle-sized one tinier, and then the littlest one tiniest. And tiny was the only one that was solidly benthic, hanging out on the bottom down there. We did also try to hang on to tinier, but tinier didn't want to settle onto the bottom and clearly just wasn't developed enough to be in this benthic stage. So we released tinier, as we also released tiniest. And then these octopuses on the right side over here, if you can see those tiny guys, those are a different species. This is a red Pacific octopus, or Octopus rubescens. And these guys are very clearly planktonic, scooting around in there. We found a lot of these, but they have a very long planktonic period, and these ones are all clearly very young. So we did not have the capacity to raise these little ones. So they were all released back into the ocean.
Excuse me, Marley.
Yes.
What is the scale of the slides that we just saw? How sad, actually?
Yeah, that's a great question. That dish that they are all in is probably about 4 or 5 inches across. So these guys are, the ones on the right side, the Octopus rubescens, are a little bigger than a grain of rice. The ones on the left side over here, tiny, is about the size of a nickel. Tinier is about the size of a dime, and tiniest is just a little smaller than a dime.
Wow. Thank you.
And about how old? sorry, about how old when you're talking about like the long juvenile stage, but like about what age is Sylvia at this point?
Yeah, so it's the short answer is that we don't know. The number of octopuses that have been raised from egg to adult, I could count on one hand. And even then, there isn't a lot of documentation, which is why this was such an exciting project. But our best guess is that Sylvia was somewhere between 4 and 6 months old when we found him. So the rest of them, tinier and tiniest, are anywhere from, I don't know, my guess would be 2 to 4 months old. So they live in this planktonic stage for quite a while before they settle down to the bottom. And Tiny happened to be just on the edge. So when we moved Tiny into a larger container, he didn't actually want to settle straight down to the bottom. So he was still just on that border of being planktonic to benthic. I also should mention that Tiny and Sylvia are the same octopus. I will describe that more in just a couple of slides, but Tiny is what we named him upon when we first found him. And then the community of Port Townsend later chose to name him Sylvia after Sylvia Earle. And I've got a story for that one, so I'll loop back around to that. But just so you all know, they are the same individual. So we had these two species of octopuses that were clearly very different. But the only way that you can actually decipher the speciation there is by looking at their chromatophores. So chromatophores are pigment containing cells. That's the little color spots that you see on them. On an adult octopus, they don't look like tiny spots. You just see it as the color of their skin, but this is what allows them to change color. And on the left picture here, this is Tiny. This is a giant Pacific octopus. And if you look closely, you can see that there's actually one little row of dots next to his suckers. So ignoring the little white suckers, there's one row of reddish dots going down each arm. So there's one row there, and then there's another row there. Compared to the red Pacific octopus in the right photo, which actually has 2 rows of dots per arm. This one is trickier to see because the chromatophores are so tiny. But there's 2 stripes right down there. And then another 2 stripes right over here. So this is the way to identify them to the species level when they are this young. And then morphologically, their shapes look a little bit different, but they're such small, at this stage, they look like half clear little boogers, honestly, little delicate boogers. So it's hard to rely on the shape of any of these little boogers to help tell us any real information. So we look at the chromatophores instead. So from this collection stage, we decide to keep Tiny. He's mostly benthic. We're gonna try to raise him up in Port Townsend. So this is our super official juvenile rearing setup, which is in fact a muck tub that we drilled a hole in the side and gave it some nice water flow. So in this stage, we used a largely hands-off approach, which was critical because at this young age, they are so delicate. So used a really hands-off approach, just kept things clean, kept this tank stocked with all of that good plankton that we found in our light trap. We were able to keep them alive in this tank and have a constant food source, constant water flow, changed up the decorations so that it wasn't a boring environment, and then just sat and wait and kept feeding this tiny little octopus and watched it very slowly grow up, which is very exciting, into this even larger clear little booger. This is a little snapshot of kind of the favorites and developments of Tiny at this point. So favorite food, live plankton. This octopus wants nothing to do with any frozen food, any prepared food, wants live plankton only, which luckily we could provide. At this point, we see that the arms are growing a lot longer. There are more chromatophores, which in this photo, it's hard to tell because he's sitting in such a clear little state. But getting more chromatophores, and we are seeing signs of a really fast growth rate, which is fabulous. That means that we've got some healthy habits going on in rearing this animal. Behaviorally, Tiny is always hidden, always tucked away, which isn't concerning because that's a natural behavior. If you are teeny tiny and squishy and vulnerable, you're going to want to stay tucked away all the time, not out and about. So at this point, Tiny is nocturnal, hidden, tucked away, but growing. So that's exciting. For scale, this little cup that Tiny is in is probably 2 inches across, 2.5 inches across. So it's pretty little. This is still a very small little octopus.
It's like a measuring cup.
Yeah. So at this point, we're moving slowly, ever so slowly, into middle life and growing up into less of a booger and more of an octopus. So you can see that the chromatophores are starting to fill in. We also tried to sex this octopus at this point. The way that you sex an octopus is by looking at their third right arm. So if you are to take this little, can you all see my pointer through the screen?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. So here, if you are to draw a little divider line straight through the middle right here.
Place though.
And sorry?
Pointer's not pointing at whatever you're pointing at.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's not.
I'll draw instead. I can draw instead. So here, if I draw a line straight through the middle,
Yeah.
then I have arm 1 right here, arm 2 right here, and arm 3 right here.
It's the wrong one. Yeah. The way she does it. Yeah.
So this third right arm is the way to determine the sex. And basically, males will have what's called a hectocotylus on the tip of their third right arm. And the hectocotylus is part of their reproductive system, and it is a suckerless arm. So there's no suckers on the tip of their arm. And this is what they use to pass their sperm packet to the female. So if you see suckers all the way to the very tip of the arm on the third right arm, then it's a female. If you don't see suckers at the tip of this arm, it's a male. And at this point, we tried our absolute hardest to see if there are suckers on the tip of this arm. And it looked like from this small size, yeah, there's suckers there. Tiny must be female. So that is why Tiny's name became Sylvia. After Sylvia Earle, we thought this is a female octopus. And then this octopus grew up much larger, and we realized that we had misidentified Tiny, and Sylvia was actually male. So Sylvia was a male giant Pacific octopus, and he was just too tiny for us to see at this point. But that is how you sex an octopus. So from here, we're continuing to do our weigh-ins. At this point, Sylvia is a lot less delicate, still delicate, but a little more robust. So we're doing weigh-ins every single week. You can see this photo on the very left side. You can see Tiny looking at you from inside. So he's growing. The photo in the middle is a bit earlier, so still pretty small. But we would weigh him in this same cup every single week, take a photo from the top down every single week so that we can track some growth and development over time. So this was a very fun little weekly game of like, ooh, how much did Tiny weigh this week? And we got to actually see all of our hard work pay off in real time. So it's very exciting. As Tiny, or Sylvia, grows larger, he starts getting a handle on his chromatophores and color changes. So these two photos on the left are actually taken about 5 seconds apart. This is the same octopus, same pose, same spot, 5 seconds apart. So we're seeing a lot more kind of classic octopus behaviors at this point, which is very cool. By this time, the photos, the size that he is in the photos, he started taking spot prawn food, which is very exciting and makes feeding a lot easier than constantly supplying live food. But he did eventually develop a really strong love for Dungeness crab. So we'll talk about that in a few slides as well. Morphologically, the tissues start becoming fully opaque, so not a clear booger anymore. And we can see textures and patterns show up. So it's a little tricky to see in these photos, but there's actually there's actually some little textural structures showing up. There's like these little horns right here. I don't know if you all can see those. But this was a very cool thing to witness because when they're adults, there's so much texture going on. And when they're little like this, it's just little bumps, but it was very, very fun to see at this level. Behaviorally, there's a lot more interaction and exploration. So instead of staying tucked away, we see a lot more curiosity and movement during daytime hours, which means that we can start moving towards display. So public display, oh man, what an exciting, cool time. We get to take this little animal that the community has known about and been following from such a tiny size and then say, hey, look, here's this very real octopus that we collected and raised. And by this point, we were able to put Sylvia into some of our bigger display tanks at the aquarium. And he very quickly became a pretty fully strong ambassador for the ocean and conservation. And the public just followed right along the whole entire journey. He was pretty shy when we first introduced him to the public, along with any, sorry, what was that? How old was he?
Yeah.
So this was about, these photos are just a little bit later, but he went on display, I want to say 4 months after we got him. So at this point, he's a little less than a year, probably 10 months old. And when we first put him on display, we put him into a smaller tank because we didn't want to lose him. If he's really tiny and he's always hidden, we want to make sure we can still keep an eye on him. But eventually he was able to move up into our big focal tank, which is where these photos are taken from. And he adjusted really quickly. So one of the very cool things about octopuses in general is that they are quick to adapt, which is cool for a lot of reasons, including our changing oceans and climates and everything, but also to different feeding schedules, to the presence of humans looking at them all day long. They're really quick to adapt. So shy at introduction, but adjusted pretty quickly to being out and about and the star of the show, truly.
Marley?
Yes.
The different colors, do they indicate a mood or what? When does the color change? For what reason do the color changes? Does the color change?
That's a fabulous question. We are unable to pinpoint mood on octopuses because they are so vastly different from us as humans. And we don't have any way to read their thought processes. I don't like to necessarily put a mood on them, But the thing that can cause a color change is really just a difference in stimulus. So if that octopus is visibly startled, like if you move really fast and that octopus kind of shrinks away really quickly, that might be a color change. If they are excited by a crab or excited by a stimulus in any way, they might turn a really deep red. By the way that their chromatophores work, when their skin muscles relax, then they tend to become a lighter color, because those chromatophores are basically, they darken and lighten by the muscles of their skin contracting. So if an octopus is relaxing or tucked away in its den, it generally is a lighter color because their skin muscles aren't contracting those skin colors. So it can be a number of different things, but it basically is just a reaction to a stimulus of some sort.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. All right, so here, this is a very unique to octopuses type of movement, which is a type of grooming. And what's happening here is that the octopus is actually kind of twirling and swirling its arms against each other and against its mantle. And in doing this, it actually sheds off a top layer of its suckers. So the same way that you and I clip our fingernails, octopuses shed a little top skin layer off of their sucker discs. And this keeps their suckers nice and strong and clean, because if there's any broken pieces on the surface of their suckers, it won't adhere as nicely. So it keeps it clean, nice and strong. And then it also kind of sheds a little bit of a mucus layer off of their skin. So we are seeing all of this natural behavior, like grooming behaviors. And I also wanted to take this cool little opportunity to tell you all about how octopuses perceive their world. So the suckers on octopuses are chemosensory, which means that they can essentially taste through their suckers. So if you put a piece of oily fish, like herring, into a tank with an octopus, the way that they know it's there is actually through tasting with their suckers, not through looking at it with their eyeballs. So in this middle photo here, you see an arm in the middle of a acrylic tube. And this is one of the ways that we would feed our octopuses for enrichment. And I'll mention that in a second. But here they actually enter and explore things with the center of their tentacle, or the center of their arm. So if you imagine like reaching into something elbow first, that's kind of how they explore their world. So they'll reach into things elbow first and feel it and taste it with their arms, instead of picking up an object with their arms and looking at it with their eyes. So it's just a different way of exploring and understanding their world.
Marley, is that for, are you talking specifically for the GPO, or do you find that's true for most of the octopuses species you've studied?
Yeah, so the suckers are chemosensory in all octopus species that I know of. But in terms of the way that they explore like that, elbow first, that does actually vary octopus to octopus. So GPOs are very, they will explore with their arms stretched out. So if you hold something of interest next to an octopus or next to a GPO, they will walk over with their first one or two arms extended. If you hold up something of interest next to a red Pacific octopus, if it's unsure of the situation, it will actually tuck all of its little arms in, kind of looks like a little dumpling, and it walks so that nobody can tell that it has arms. So they call it moving rock, is technically the word for that behavior. I think it looks like a dumpling. And so they like sit all tucked in and they'll move along without sticking any arms out, whereas a GPO will explore arms first. So those kinds of behaviors are different species to species, but the morphology of tasting with their suckers is consistent across the board.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So now we get to talk about enrichment. If you have, if you've been to an aquarium's octopus talk, there's a good chance you've seen something like this. Or if you've been to a zoo and seen a polar bear chasing a ball around its enclosure, it's the same thing. So enrichment is a way to provide a stimulating environment for these animals and get them the nutrition and muscle movement that they need. And it can actually simulate foraging behavior in the wild as well. Something that I find amazing about octopuses is how quickly they learn. So I'm not convinced that octopuses are the smartest animals around. They don't hatch as geniuses, but they can learn anything. So these octopuses, you'll see in the top right corner, this is just 3 toddler mega blocks stuck together. And this octopus had to learn how to take those apart and find the food inside. And eventually you can introduce them to more and more challenging things until they're solving harder puzzles, like Eleonora here in the center. And this is actually a dog toy that has a little cylinder in the center to disperse treats. But this one, we had to make it harder because she was getting bored with how it was before. So we added a sleeve on the outside. So now she has to line up a plastic sleeve with a hole to the treat dispensing hole. She has to line those up and then reach inside for the fish. And the enrichment phase of keeping an octopus in captivity is critical for their health, for their behavioral development. And it also shows some really interesting preferences. So Eleonora loved frozen food. If anything was thawed, she wanted nothing to do with it. So this toy here, it took her longer to solve it the first time. By the time she solved it, the fish inside was thawed and she didn't eat it. So we fed her something different that day anyway, because she didn't want it by the time it was thawed. Compared to Sylvia, who didn't want anything to do with frozen food, only wanted thawed food or live food, but did not want to touch it if it was cold. So there's a lot of really cool individuality that comes out in this phase of raising animals. The best part about having these octopuses in captivity is the impact that they have. Without a doubt, octopuses, in my experience at least, octopuses are hugely impactful for the public that comes to see them. We had kiddos drawing pictures like what you see here on this slide, writing love poems, wanting to tell their love poems to the octopus in the aquarium. We were able to do these educational talks, which is what you see in the bottom left-hand corner here, and teach everybody who was in the area just about what we're doing and about these incredible animals. And it's truly remarkable how inspiring it can be to have an animal like this who's properly cared for, who is out and about. It's amazing what they can do in terms of inspiring conservation and inspiring just a love of the ocean. So finally, we get to later in life. I love this video because this is actually Sylvia just being blown in the breeze by the water flow. So he is choosing to sit there. You can see his arm blowing in that water flow. So sometimes they will give themselves a little jacuzzi and sit right in front of the water flow and just be blown around. So I love that video of him. At this point in life, across the board with GPOs at least, their favorite food is Dungeness crab. They will eat red rock crab, they will eat spot prawns, but oh man, if you put a Dungeness crab in that tank, they are honed in, ready for it. We did feed our GPOs live food occasionally and when we can, because it's a great behavioral training opportunity to get them ready for the wild. They still know how to hunt. They still know how to eat those live foods. So it's a great skill. Morphologically, at this point in life, towards the end, you see a slower healing process. So just like if you or I were to eat a live crab and didn't know how to avoid the claws or had too many arms to avoid the claws, occasionally you get a little pinch. Usually octopuses have a really fast healing response, really fast. Any little scratch you see in their skin heals up very quickly in days. By this point in life, you see a slower healing response, which is natural and the same in the wild as well. And they start becoming a little less interested in toys, in enrichment. Again, all of this is the same in the wild as well, but when they're in captivity, we can document it all day by day. At this point, we start thinking about reproduction and senescence. So octopus reproduction, like I said at the start of this talk, happens right at the end of their lifespan. Most octopus species, including GPOs, are what's called semelparous. This just means that they lay one clutch of eggs in their lifetime and then they die. There is another species later on that I'll talk about that lays multiple, but GPOs are single clutch and then that's the end of their life. They reach sexual maturity around 2 years. This varies individual to individual. It can be earlier than that. It can be 3 years, 4 years. Generally, it's about 2. They do have a programmed short lifespan. So what that means is that even if they were to have every single resource available to them, they were kept in the safest, most enriching environment, they would still die at that time frame. So this process of senescence is basically the name for their end of life period, where gamete deposition begins. So they're prepping for reproduction. And then they have this list of behavioral changes where they're less interested in enrichment, in food, in their caretakers. They tend to slow down a little bit. And the reason for this is that every single resource in their body is being allocated to reproduction. They're no longer allocating nutrition for growth. They're no longer out hunting for themselves to add this 2% of body weight per day. They are simply trying to reproduce and find a mate or lay eggs and reproduce. Anytime we have an octopus in captivity, we want to release at any starting signs of senescence. Because if an octopus is showing behaviorally and physically that they are beginning to senesce, then reproduction is just around the corner. And especially at facilities that have the capacity to release anything that's coastal, we want to allow them to add back into their wild population. I don't want to take an animal out and then not let them reproduce and help the species out. So at this point, we're thinking, okay, behaviors are starting to slow down. We're going to get a release plan in motion. And females, so males will mate with a female most likely once, sometimes more times. But the females will, after mating, will lay between 18 and 74,000 eggs. They'll lay them in these ribbons hanging from the top of a den, and then they're just going to sit there. They will sit and guard their eggs and fan fresh water over them and keep them clean until eggs hatch or until they die. So, because of all of this, we wanted to release Sylvia. Luckily, at the Port Townsend Marine Science Center, we had collected Sylvia from directly underneath the pier. If you haven't been to this Marine Science Center, it is on a pier. It's an aquarium on a pier. So we collected Sylvia from underneath. We were going to release right back underneath. You want to release in the same site as you collect. So we want to avoid senescence in captivity for individual welfare. We want them to reproduce, and we don't want to make any negative impact on the wild populations. Ideally, we're doing this right at the start of their reproductive maturity, right at the onset of senescence, not after they have senesced. For the how of this changes a bit based on your location and what resources you have. Here we were able to release at the exact same spot we collected, and it's important to find a suitable habitat first. So I myself am a diver. This is me in these photos. I was able to, with my dive buddies, dive here, find a good spot that has rocks and Dungeness crab and a nice little hollowed out log, which is perfect for a den. So I was able to do a diving release. You can also do a surface release if divers are not available. Unfortunately, we don't really have a great way to do any long-term monitoring. There are technologies to do like a subdermal chip implant on octopuses to track their location. I have never been in a position where I was able to use that. We didn't have that available to us. So this is we will release in the best possible scenario with the best possible food, and hope that Sylvia can go out, find a mate, reproduce.
It must have been sad.
Can I ask you a couple questions, Marley?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so one is it goes back a bit, but you had mentioned in a really early photo about maybe you can see those horns start to develop, and then when you had the little video of him in the water flow, you could see it first like this one. What is the purpose of the horns, if anything? What are they for?
Yeah, they are just skin. Is the short answer. It's just skin. As far as a purpose, I don't know what their purpose is. I don't know if anybody knows what their purpose is. They are more prominent in some individuals compared to others. And they tend to, from what I have seen in my experience with GPOs, they tend to kind of come out when an octopus is more actively aware or engaged in the environment. So if they're just sitting there relaxing, they don't usually have their little horns up. But it happens really quickly. Like I'll look at them and then they'll be fully smooth skinned, nothing going on. And 3 seconds later, they've got horns that are an inch tall. So it's actually just a contraction of their skin muscles. And it is just a cool little feature. Sometimes they get so tall that they kind of flop over on the top, which I think is and looks kind of like little bunny ears. But yeah, I don't really know what their purpose is. It's a good question though.
And then my other question is, how much did Sylvia weigh when you were at this point of release?
Yeah, Sylvia weighed 35 pounds at this point. We collected Sylvia, so we collected Sylvia and then didn't weigh him for the first month and a half because we didn't want to disturb him at all. So I don't know how much he weighed when we got him, but we started weighing about a month and a half in. And at that point, he was a couple of grams. So went from a couple of grams to 35 pounds. So it's a huge amount of growth. And you'll be able to see in this little video and in this kind of screenshot as well, that he's pretty huge. His arm span was at least 6 feet, if not 8 or 9 feet across. So he's a big octopus by the time we're ready to release him.
Thank you.
So at this point, I just want to show you all this little video that I did not personally make. This was made by the team at the Marine Science Center, namely Allie Redman, who is the curator there. But I just want to, hopefully this works. Just want to show you all. So that was the end of Sylvia's story. That release went as well as I could have ever hoped. It was amazing. So I'll leave some time for questions at the end as well. But before I give up the floor, I just wanted to introduce you all to some really cool other octopus species that are out there. GPOs are beautiful, fabulous animals. I adore them. But they tend to get a lot of the credit because they're really big and cool and gregarious. But I just thought that I would take this opportunity to show you some other cool members of this group here. So this is a smooth skin octopus, Moose Octopus leoderma. This individual is named Peach. She arrived at the Marine Science Center because she was collected and then could not get released again. We couldn't access the release site. So she basically just needed a spot to live happily until the end of her life. This species is really interesting because they are what's called a large-egged octopus. And that just means that when they lay eggs, they lay fewer of them. So this species lays about 200 eggs. And then when they hatch, they don't hatch planktonic. So instead of hatching and then floating away, they actually hatch and immediately are crawling along the bottom, which is so cool. You have 200 little crawling around little octopuses after they hatch. So smooth skin octopuses, very cool. This is the same group of octopuses if you have seen any footage of deep sea octopuses that are usually kind of grayish white. Same group, but different species. And this one was, we were told she will never come out. She will hide in the back corner all day long. You're just gonna leave food in there. You'll come in the next day, the food will be gone. But she was a joy to have in the aquarium. She is, on the photo on the left, she's pulling a piece of shrimp out of a Little Red Riding Hood finger puppet, which was one of her toys. So that's what that red thing is right there. But yeah, she was great, out and about, and is very unique. They don't really change color very much, and their skin is so smooth the whole time. So they're just kind of this cute little blobby octopus with eyes, but man, she was great, Peach. This is Octopus rubescens, or the red Pacific octopus. This is the adult version of those tiny little rice grain sized octopuses from the video at the very beginning. So this is what they grow up into. This species is slowly gaining a little bit of traction in terms of public education and public display. They have a remarkable range of colors and textures to show off. So GPOs can change color, but they're not going to turn pink or brown or blue. They kind of stay red to orange to white. Red Pacific octopuses can turn like deep maroon and bright pink, and they end up with these wild color patterns that ends up in like little V patterns between their eyeballs. And their textures are wild. This photo on the left, so the photo on the left is named Paprika. The one on the right is Rhodey. And Paprika is all spiky. It looks like she has little things growing all over her, but that's actually just her skin. So instead of having some of those bigger bumps or those little horns, she just turns into a whole spiky little animal that looks kind of like a piece of algae. So these guys are very fun. They are equally gregarious, in my opinion. They want to play with toys. They want to be out and about. And they will grow to about the size of a baseball when they're fully grown, curled up. So they'll get larger than that in terms of how far they stretch out. But if they sit all curled up, it's about baseball sized. Stretched out, they can have an arm span of, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet, 2.5 feet. Yeah, very, very fun species. I think that there will be more of them in public aquariums soon, because their care is actually very similar to giant Pacific octopuses. So these guys are called pygmy zebra octopuses, also sometimes called the lesser Pacific striped octopus. This is Octopus churchii. Octopus churchii is actually my personal study animal. So this is the species that I work with in my master's research. This is a very unique little tiny species that, like the smooth skin octopuses, they hatch as tiny benthic octopuses. So they don't float at all. They're not planktonic. But this species is what we call iteroparous. So I mentioned that GPOs are semelparous, and they lay one clutch of eggs per lifetime. Octopus churchii lays multiple clutches of eggs throughout their lifetime, and they all hatch as tiny little benthic octopuses. Another really exciting thing about this species is that they are showing some very unique behaviors. One of them is called tasseling, and it's actually a courtship behavior. So we don't typically see courtship behaviors in octopuses, but this is when a male is pursuing a female to reproduce, and he shows some sort of unique behavior. Tasseling in this case is basically if you hold your hands up like this. I don't know if you guys can see me on the screen, but if you hold your hands up and you kind of shake your arms back and forth, like pretend like you're shaking maracas or something like that, that's called tasseling. And these little octopuses will shake the little tips of their arms at the female that they're pursuing, which is very fun. These ones are very small. When they're fully grown, sitting curled up, they're about the size of a golf ball. When they hatch, they're about the size of a grain of rice, a short grain of rice. But yes, very, very cool species. They also, their striping pattern that's on them is unique. So it's like a thumbprint. They're like a little thumbprint octopus, which is very fun. And then finally, the last part of my presentation. Oh, I've got some video that isn't playing. Bummer. I don't know. Well, that's a little video of an octopus moving around. But last part of my presentation, I just wanted to throw out a couple of cool research developments that are going on with octopuses. So first, for neurology, there's some research going on about the wiring and neurons in their brain and arms. You may have heard that octopuses have 9 brains. They actually have one central brain, which is in the shape of a ring, kind of like a donut. And then each arm is so densely packed with neurons that it essentially functions as an individual brain. So they're not swimming around with 9 like solid masses of brain, but their arms are so densely packed that each arm can function on its own and actually communicate with the other arms as well, which is very mind-blowing. There's also some eyesight research going on. So octopus eyeballs are very similar in structure to human eyes, but they don't have color receptors, but somehow they can camouflage. So there's some work being done looking at any color receptor proteins in their skin so that they can maybe perceive color through their skin, which would be very unique to the animal kingdom if they can perceive color through their skin. Behavior studies are ongoing. This is what I work in, but basically there's such a huge range of work going on with this, all the way from classifying behaviors that we see across all species to isolating behaviors such as tasseling that we see in one species but not another, and then looking at what that behavior might mean for their ecology and their interactions and things like that. So for fisheries and population trends, octopuses are a very culturally important species to a lot of countries around the world, both as cultural figures, but also as a food source. And in order to not deplete our wild populations, there's a lot of population research going on to track octopus fisheries and octopus populations, so that we don't deplete our oceans, just like with any other fishery. There is a theory that GPOs are slowly moving deeper in our oceans because of warming oceans. They're moving deeper to cooler waters. So some divers are saying that they're seeing fewer of them at the same locations that they may have seen more of in the past. Oh, there's my video. And finally, husbandry. So husbandry just is the area of animal care. And we are constantly trying to improve our animal care practices across the entire industry. The more we know about what these animals require, what they are doing day to day, what they need to eat, what they need to survive, the better we can provide for them, both in research settings and also in public education settings, so that we can continue showing them off to all of you, which is such a cool part of what I do. Thank you all for listening. This is, at this point, I'd love to take some more questions if you have any. This video here is of Eleonora actually playing Kraken, taking down a little toddler toy boat that we put a giant frozen clam inside of. So that's why she's reaching into the middle there. But yeah, love to take your questions.
Great. I'm gonna help facilitate the questions because Marley can't really see you.
Thank you.
Well, she asked me, Marion, what's your question?
Well, since your little zebra guys are benthic straight away, have you been able to yet raise them generation to generation in a lab? I'm curious.
It's a fabulous question. I personally have not, but I also have not been in a position to, I don't have enough resources up here to commit to that. They have been successfully reared through multiple generations at a very large lab in Massachusetts, in Woods Hole. And that's where those 2 photos came from as well, is from MBL in Woods Hole. As far as me personally being able to rear them, this project of just rearing one giant Pacific octopus is so wildly time consuming and takes so much in terms of timing and resources and research behind the scenes that I wish I had more time to do that, honestly, because it was so fun. But I don't personally do that right now.
Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions?
What is their range? Like, do they just live in the Pacific Ocean, or do they live in other oceans?
For the GPOs?
Yeah.
They live pretty much up and down the Pacific coast of US and even down through California. They pretty much stay on the Pacific side. I don't know of any sightings over on the Atlantic side. There are plenty of other octopus species that live in those areas, but GPOs in particular are pretty strictly Pacific.
But are they on the other side of the Pacific also?
Like in
There
Japan?
Yeah, they do sometimes show up over there. They're not a warm water octopus, so as soon as you get too close down to the equator, we don't see them. But in colder waters for sure.
There's a question.
Oh, there's a question in chat, which I can see over here. Hang on a sec.
Oh, okay. From
Can you see
Randall.
that, Marley?
Yeah, I just pulled that one up. What can you tell us about Dumbo octopuses? I cannot tell you much about Dumbo octopuses. The group of octopuses is so wildly diverse, as I hope you have seen a little bit of tonight. I really don't know much about them. I know that they have a very deep range. So we see them in shallower waters, but also all the way down to some of our deepest exploration points. But that's about it. I don't know much else about them.
Good, another question here. Go ahead.
Yeah. I had a word. Should I feel guilty about eating calamari? Because I have to be honest, as soon as I learned as an adult a number of years ago how intelligent octopuses are, like I just will not eat it. And I grew up in a family where that's like, people always order that and they put it on their pasta and all kinds of things. And then I was like, no, is that unreasonable?
That I would say you're not alone in feeling that. I personally don't see, I hold more issue with the sustainability of where that animal is sourced from rather than its intelligence. I think I personally don't eat octopuses purely because I have felt what their suckers feel like on my arm, and I can't bring myself to eat that same structure. So that's why I personally don't eat them. But it has not. It's more. I would say if you are trying to figure out if you should eat them or if you should not eat them, I would say focus more on the sustainability of it rather than the intelligence of it, because it's tricky. I personally don't think that octopuses hatch as geniuses. I think they're quick learners. They're very interesting animals that adapt very quickly. But I would say focus more on the sustainability side.
Thank you. Another question, Diane.
I'm just curious, what is the Marine Science Center, Port Townsend? What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Port Townsend Marine Science Center is a nonprofit organization in Port Townsend up on the Olympic Peninsula. And it's a fabulous organization that wears 50 different hats. So they have an aquarium facility. They also have a museum facility with largely focused on conservation and marine mammals, salmon movements, things like that. But they do public education. They do school group education, especially for some schools that don't typically have funding. They do some free school visit programming, which is fabulous. Community outreach, community cleanups, citizen science. So they have a lot of really interesting citizen-focused research going on. And they are eventually actually in the process of moving towards kind of unifying their aquarium and museum collections into one fabulous large exhibit. But at the moment they are in Fort Worden State Park. in Port Townsend. It's an awesome organization. I worked with them for 3 years and made incredible community connections and friends there. So if you get a chance, go visit. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'll just comment. And so I started going there years ago, camping at Fort Worden, and as soon as I started to read Remarkably Bright Creatures, right away, this is what I pictured was Port Townsend. So I know people who have been there doing the volunteer work, and I think Marley, when I am a member actually, when I read it, it was really started even I think by teachers who wanted to they wanted people to be aware of what the Salish Sea, what the pressures under it, and what's going on environmentally.
Mm-hmm. It was, yeah, you've got it right. It was started by a couple of mothers who also were teachers and wanted to show their kids and their students about the Salish Sea and teach them. And it started out as some fiberglass tanks on a pier where they would collect some intertidal animals and teach about them. And it has evolved into this staple of the community where there's a massive volunteer group that helps out, and it's, yeah, it has really grown a lot, and I adore that organization. But yes, very cool. Go visit. Amazing to hear that you're a member. That's awesome.
That's how I found you.
Yeah, that's how we found you.
Octopus.
Very cool.
What's funny is that's their newsletter. It's called the Octopus.
Yeah.
Are there other questions? Well, Marley, I think you have answered all of our whimsical needs and on octopuses. I want to thank you so much for coming to us from Alaska. I want to thank Jamie Baird. They're online there doing the technology for us. Thank you so much, both of you. And Marley, we learned so much tonight. So
thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you all.